Fellas, I'm going to be taking a look at a few examples recently of UFC fights that didn't exceed the expectations. So these fights were hyped up as if they were going to be an absolute banger. There were going to be wars. There were going to be massive rivalries that were going to be set, and we were expected to see an absolute banger of a fight. And then they just didn't really perform. They ended up being boring fights. They didn't really have any, animosity in the actual octagon. There was more fights outside the octagon than in. And just a few examples of fights that didn't deliver as we expected in recent history. A couple rivalries on this list as well. So let me know your thoughts on the list and if I should have included any more fights, but we're going over the first fight on this list, and he's quite recent as well. Strickland versus Paulo Costa at UFC 302. This definitely had a lot of hype. The expectation going into this fight was it's going to be an absolute war, especially from Strickland. He kept saying at the press conference it's going to be an absolute war. You've got a brawler who hits very hard in Paulo Costa. You know, we'd had a lot of fun fights with guys like Luke Rockhold and even the fight before with Robert Whittaker. And then you've got Strickland, a more technical guy. The clash of styles I thought was going to be quite interesting. They were hyping it up as if it's going to be a bloodbath. There's going to be blood everywhere, and there's no way that it goes the distance. It's going to be a finish within the rounds. That was the expectation going to this fight. We were expecting it to be an absolute war. We were expecting it to be fight of the night, but the reality, it was nothing like that. It was just jab and teeps from Strickland the entire fight, walking forward, body kick, jab and teeps the entire fight from Strickland. Paulo Costa backing up and landing nothing significant. Even worse, there were no significant moments the entire fight. I don't remember there was a single significant moment in the entire fight. Maybe the last 10 seconds when Strickland started applying the pressure to Paulo Costa. But apart from that, there was no significant moments the entire fight. There was no blood, which we were expecting. There was no bloodbath or no blood or anything like that. There weren't even any knockdowns. There weren't even any fighters getting rocked. It was just a pretty bland fight. It was Strickland walking forward. Not the highest output, just kind of walking forward, front kick to the body, jab and teeps to Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa basically just taking it. It was not a war. It was not a bloodbath. It looked like, like these guys were hyping up as if it was going to be the war, the best fight of the night. They were going to come and try and kill each other. And I realised that Strickland does that a lot. He kind of gives off the expectation that we're going to be seeing a massive fight, like a massive war from Strickland. And then he never actually goes and does that. He does the bare minimum just to outpoint his fighters. It's a technique that works. It's effective for Strickland. It's why he's one of the best in the world. But it wasn't a banger. It wasn't an interesting fight. It was quite a snooze fest from the both of them. So Strickland, Paulo Costa didn't perform as we expected. We were promised a war, and we basically got just a basic point decision by Strickland. So that's one example of a fight that we were promised was going to be an absolute banger in a war, and it just didn't perform that well. Another example is one of the biggest rivalries. Jorge Masvidal versus Covington. This was quite a while ago, I think 2022. Yeah, this fight, this was one of the biggest rivalries in the UFC. There was so much expectations going into this fight. Both men are going to try and murder each other. The history that these guys have had, the way they were going at it at the press conference, like I said, the massive history between the two of them. We're expecting them to go out there and try and murder each other, take each other's souls. Every single time they saw each other, they were trying to fight each other, so we thought they were going to go and kill each other in the octagon. It's the biggest rivalry of all time, and it's going to show in the octagon. Masvidal keeps talking about how he's going to separate him from consciousness. We're going to see Masvidal go out there and take his head off. And that just wasn't the case. Once again, the reality of this fight, that there was actually more damage done outside the octagon than in. Jorge Masvidal had 25 minutes to do whatever he wanted to Covington, did nothing, and then a couple weeks later after, met him at a bar or a restaurant in Miami, and then decided to fight him when he had 25 minutes previous in the octagon, which didn't really make any sense. And it was just Covington out-wrestling Masvidal with no significant damage. It wasn't like he mauled him. It wasn't like he absolutely... Well, he did dominate Masvidal, but it wasn't like he did so much damage to him. It was just Covington simply out-wrestling Jorge Masvidal when we were hyped that it was going to be an absolute war with two guys trying to murder each other. There was one useless knockdown the entire fight. With a fight of this caliber, with the hype that it had, I was expecting there to be knockdowns left, right, and centre, but there was one knockdown from Jorge Masvidal which didn't even stun Covington. Covington got straight back up. He said he took a knee as well, which kind of just showed how irrelevant and how insignificant the knockdown was. So there was just one useless knockdown the entire fight, and both of them didn't even want to be there. Maybe Covington wanted to be there, but both guys looked like they didn't even want to hurt each other. For the rivalry that these guys had, like I said, you would have been expecting them to try and take each other's head off, but they both just kind of looked like, especially from Covington, that they wanted to get the win and then leave. They didn't really want to hurt each other, especially from Masvidal saying that he's going to separate Covington from consciousness, and then he went out there and did absolutely nothing significant apart from one knockdown the entire fight. So Masvidal versus Covington, for the caliber of the rivalry and for how hyped this fight was, it didn't really perform that well. It was a good performance from Kobby Covington. I'm not saying it was necessarily a boring fight. It was a good performance from Kobby Covington. But if you had no previous knowledge to these guys when you previous knowledge to these guys when they were fighting, you would not know that they had one of the biggest rivalries in the UFC, if not the biggest rivalry in the UFC at the time. So Jorge Masvidal, Kobby Covington, another example of a fight that didn't perform as we expected. Another rivalry is actually more recent, and it's Makai versus Manel Cap. Just happened at UFC 304, so bad that it caused Makai to get cut. But let's talk about the expectations. The expectations was this won't last a minute. Every single time these guys saw each other, they were fighting. At the fighter hotel, at the weigh-ins, they were trying to fight each other. People thought this wouldn't even last a minute. They're just going to go out there and start throwing. They're going to throw the game plan out the window. Like I said, even before the fight, they were trying to fight each other as they were in the octagon. We thought there was going to be no game plan. We didn't think Makai was going to try and shoot takedowns. We didn't think Manel Cap was going to try and make it technical. We thought they were going to stand in the middle and try and take each other's head off, and they're just going to scrap immediately. Well, like I said, the way they were going before the fight, it looked like they didn't want to go through the introductions. They just wanted to get in there and punch each other in the face. And then the fight started, and they tried fighting more before, like before the fight than in the fight. Like they were, going at it when there was security, and then they finally get the opportunity to fight, and they were just feinting, feeling each other out the entire fight, and both of them had nothing to offer on the feet. Makai every 10 seconds went for a high kick that didn't land, and for a guy like Manel Cap, I expected him to do a bit more on the feet. He'd just pressure Makai against the cage and then do nothing against him, and there was just no significant moments the entire fight. The only moment that came from this fight was Makai trying to pull Manel Cap's shorts down. That was it, and that wasn't even part of the proper fight. So no significant moments the entire fight, and neither of them even hurt each other significantly once. For the way they were going at each other before the fight, and I remember when this got put down to the prelims, everyone was going mad. Everyone was saying, what are the UFC doing? Why are they putting Makai versus Manel Cap in the prelims? This is going to be an absolute banger. They hate each other. It's a massive rivalry. What are the UFC thinking? And then the fight went down, and I don't even blame the UFC for putting it in the prelims, because it was a terrible fight. It wasn't interesting. It was a snooze fest. And for the hype that this fight had before, and it wasn't even just like the press conference hype. Like I said, it was the way they were going at each other like minutes before they were going to fight, just to do absolutely nothing in the octagon for both of them. And it actually caused Makai to get cut from the UFC. So that's another example of a fight that had so much, just a massive rivalry brewing. A fight that we thought was going to be so good. A fight where we thought both of them were going to throw the game plan out the window or go and scrap. And it wasn't the case. It was a bit of a boring fight from both men as well, when Makai was able to pick up a decision. So that's another example of a fight that didn't perform. The next one is another recent one at UFC 3. Well, which one was this? UFC 303. Ian Garry versus MVP. This is another fight that I kind of expected this to be a lot better than it was. Now, it was hyped up as if it was going to be a striking masterclass. Now, to be fair, I did say coming into this fight that, that you've got two counter punchers. I don't think it's going to be a war on the feet, but people are hyping up if it's going to be a striking masterclass. You've got Ian Garry, outstruck Jeff Neal, outstruck Neil Magny, great striker, and then MVP, who's regarded as one of the greatest strikers in the UFC right now, or the best strikers in the UFC right now. We thought it was going to be a war on the feet, two technical strikers going at it. We thought it was going to be a technical striking masterclass, and just overall, such a fun fight to watch if you're a fan of striking. You like guys striking on the feet, this is the exact fight for you. Two great strikers going at each other. How can it go wrong? Well, the reality was Ian Garry just out-wrestles MVP the entire fight. Yeah, Ian Garry didn't want any part of MVP on the feet. To be fair to MVP, his grappling did look horrendous in this fight, and I'm not trying to blame Ian Garry. He got the win. It was obviously the correct game plan, but from an entertainment perspective, it wasn't good to see. It was just Ian Garry out-wrestling MVP the entire fight. Not a single submission from Ian Garry. No significant moments with ground and pound. A lot of the time, he was just holding the same position to pass time and get control time, so it just wasn't interesting to watch as a fan. You've got Ian Garry against MVP, and that's the performance that they did against each other, and there was only 3 significant strikes that were memorable. I only remember 3 times when MVP, who's a counter striker, had to dart in against Ian Garry, and I think a couple of times he landed a good shot on Ian Garry, didn't rock him or anything, and apart from that, those were the only significant strikes. And it was just overall both guys waiting for the other guy to come in. Like I said, leading up to this fight, you've got 2 counter strikers against each other. It's not like you've got Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, guys who walk forward and brawl. MVP and Ian Garry are both counter strikers. You put 2 counter strikers strikers against each other, it's probably not going to be that good of a fight. So it wasn't that good. They didn't barely anything on the feet, about 3 significant strikes on the feet that were memorable, and the rest of the fight was just Ian Garry out wrestling MVP, trying to pass time and get as much control time as possible. So Ian Garry, MVP, another example of a fight that didn't perform, and we thought it was going to be a great technical striking fight. Just wasn't the case. And the final example I've got is Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane. Now listen, I'm not going to say it was a terrible fight because, well, it wasn't. I'm not going to say it was, I'm not going to say I was disappointed. Jon Jones went out there and finished Ciryl Gane in a minute. It was a good performance from Jon Jones, but the expectation going into this fight was, first and foremost, Ciryl Gane would have definitely improved his takedown defense after his Francis fight. Obviously, well, the last title fight that Ciryl Gane had was against Francis Ngannou, and he got completely out-wrestled. His grappling got completely exposed in that fight, and we expected Ciryl Gane to be coming back with much better takedown defense and much more fresh Ciryl Gane, ready to be facing a guy who can actually grapple, much better than Francis Ngannou in Jon Jones, and that obviously wasn't the case. It was getting hyped up as the new breed heavyweight versus Jon Jones. Ciryl Gane is the new breed of the heavyweight division. He's different compared to all the other heavyweights versus the greatest of all time, a guy that has never lost before, and it was going to be hyped up as Jon Jones' toughest test of years. He's moving up to the heavyweight division after years of inactivity against a guy who's on his come up. There was so much narratives going into this fight. The reality was, Ciryl Gane hadn't improved his takedown defense at all. He looked like he hadn't improved his takedown defense at all since the Ngannou fight. You would have thought his defense would have been a little bit better, considering his last title fight he got ragdolled by Ngannou, and it just hadn't improved at all, which was quite disappointing to see from Ciryl Gane. And it just was quite a sloppy fight, a groin shot immediately. Jon Jones looking stiff on the feet, kind of just threw Ciryl Gane to the ground, got a submission from a weird angle. It wasn't a technical fight. It wasn't a great fight. It was a bit of a sloppy fight. It wasn't the best fight to see. The result was amazing from Jon Jones, but the fight itself, it was just quite sloppy and, just not really that technical. And it was a quick finish. Like I said, it was good from Jon Jones to get a quick finish, but it was just honestly disappointing. I was expecting more from this fight. I was expecting more from both men, especially Ciryl Gane. I thought he was going to put up a bigger fight, considering he's getting the second title shot against one of the biggest stars in the sport. His takedown defense hadn't improved. He couldn't offer anything on the feet, and it was just quite a disappointing fight overall. So that's another example of a fight that I think, didn't live up to the expectation. And those are a few examples of UFC fights recently that just haven't really lived up to the expectation. The expectation was that it was going to be a really good fight, and it just didn't perform as good as we thought. So that's a couple examples. Let me know if I've missed any fights off of this list. But yeah, thank you for watching.